Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll get you the top stories from India and the region. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh, and for news from rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague Kate Fisher in Washington, D.C. Good to have you with us, Kate.
Good morning, Shubhendu. It's 10 a.m. here in Washington, D.C. and 3 o'clock in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up this morning, leaders of G7 countries have begun their annual summit with Ukraine and China on the agenda. That's taking place in Italy. And we'll have the latest on the election campaign from the UK. Back to you now, though, for the rest of the day's news.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi en route to Italy for G7 outreach summit underlines focus on AI, energy, Africa and the Mediterranean. Ukrainian Defense Minister meets NATO counterparts in Brussels. Kremlin says West is escalating by encouraging Ukraine to strike Russia. 756,000 Sudanese risk facing starvation in the coming months, more than half the population facing critical shortages in the war-torn country. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is travelling to Italy to participate in the G7 Outreach Summit. In his departure statement, Prime Minister says, and I quote, "I'm travelling to Apulia region in Italy to participate in the G7 Outreach Summit on 14th June 2024. I'm glad that my first visit in the third consecutive term is to Italy for the G7 Summit. I warmly recall my visit to Italy for the G20 Summit in 2021. Prime Minister Meloni's two visits to India last year were instrumental in infusing momentum and depth in our bilateral agenda. We remain committed to consolidate the India-Italy strategic partnership and bolster cooperation in the Indo-Pacific and the Mediterranean regions. During the discussions at the outreach session, the focus would be on artificial intelligence, energy, Africa and the Mediterranean." He further says it will be an opportunity to bring greater synergy between the outcomes of the G20 summit held under India's presidency and the forthcoming G7 summit. I'm also looking forward to meeting other leaders participating in the summit. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has departed for the G7 summit in Italy on Thursday. In his outreach, Prime Minister will hold a bilateral meeting with Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni and other world leaders. G7 is a grouping of the world's 7 most developed economies. It comprises Italy, Germany, Canada, France, the United States, the United Kingdom and Japan. And here's an exclusive report from DD India correspondent Amritpal Singh.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi departed for a day-long trip to Italy, where he'll be participating in the G7 summit, taking part in the outreach session where he shall touch upon issues like artificial intelligence, energy, greater cooperation with Africa and the Mediterranean. The Prime Minister could also raise the issue of cross-border terrorism and the need for the world to take a united stand against it. The Prime Minister would also hold bilateral meetings with, of course, the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, on whose invitation the Prime Minister is visiting Italy, where he would review the entire gamut of the relationship and would want to work out the contours of how the relationship can be taken forward. The Prime Minister, interestingly, will meet with President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, where he is expected to reiterate India's long-standing position of taking the course of talks and diplomacy to address the conflict and find the way out of the conflict rather than through military victory. The Prime Minister is expected to meet UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the French President Emmanuel Macron. Also, he would meet with the other partner countries from the African nations and use both his bilateral meetings and his intervention at the G7 to push the agenda of the global south and see that more synergy can be brought in between the outcomes of the G20 New Delhi Declaration and the communique at Borgo Egnazia here in Italy of the G7. With cameraman Shailendra Chauhan, this is Amritpal Singh in Apulia, Italy for DD India.
Okay, let's stay with the developments at the G7 summit. Meetings have begun in Apulia, Italy. Joining me now is Kate Fisher from Washington, D.C. for more on this and other stories from around the world. Kate, the deliberations in Italy could shape the global conflicts and economies in the days ahead.
Yes, you're right, Shubhendu. The leaders of the G7 democracies have begun this summit in Italy, but many of them are under a cloud back at home, and that could be making things more tricky as they negotiate. But they say they're determined to make a difference on the world stage as they seek to help Ukraine in its war against Russia and to counter China's economic ambitions. Heading into 2 days of talks, diplomats said that a deal had been agreed in principle on plans to issue $50 billion of loans for Ukraine using interest from Russian sovereign assets that were frozen after Moscow launched its invasion of its neighbour in 2022. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni expressed the hope that the talks will lead to concrete and measurable results.
The message we want to convey is a G7 that, under the Italian presidency, wants to strengthen its dialogue with the nations of the global south. We have done this because this land is historically a bridge between West and East. It is, let's say, a land of dialogue at the center of the Mediterranean Sea, of that Middle Sea that connects the two great maritime spaces of the globe, that is, the Atlantic on one side, the Indo-Pacific on the other.
Well, the G7 comprises the United States, Japan, Canada, Germany, France, Italy and the United Kingdom. The European Union also participates in the discussions. British opposition Labour leader Keir Starmer has unveiled his party's agenda for government on Thursday, pitching to voters ahead of the July 4th election. In its manifesto, the Labour Party promised to recognise the state of Palestine as a contribution to a renewed peace process which would result in a two-state solution. The Labour Party said if it wins the national election, it would remain steadfast in providing financial, military and diplomatic support for Ukraine. Just 2 days earlier, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak proposed $22 billion of tax cuts in his Conservative Party manifesto. Well, the two candidates, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the Labour leader Keir Starmer, were grilled by voters at a televised event on Wednesday. Both were challenged over their past decisions, their pledges and how they would fund policies if they win the July 4th election. Sunak was booed and heckled over doctors' strikes, migration and his policy to introduce national service for young people. On the other hand, Keir Starmer was taken to task for what one audience member said was his avoidance of answering questions and over his previous support of his predecessor, left-wing veteran Jeremy Corbyn. Well, Britain on Thursday imposed its first sanctions targeting vessels in Russian President Vladimir Putin's shadow fleet that it says was used to circumvent Western sanctions and to continue trade in Russian oil. The action, a part of 50 new sanctions and coordinated with G7 partners, also targets suppliers of munitions, machine tools, microelectronics and logistics to Russia's military, including entities based in China, Israel, Kyrgyzstan and Turkey. NATO's defence ministers have gathered in Brussels for a two-day meeting where they were joined by Ukrainian Defence Minister Rustem Umerov. NATO members are set to take tougher action against Russian spies and discuss the situation in Ukraine. Speaking ahead of a meeting of NATO defence ministers, US Secretary of Defence Lloyd Austin said that NATO members would be less secure if tyrants think that they can simply trample borders and cow their neighbours. Amid rising tensions between Russia and Ukraine, NATO countries have kicked out hundreds of alleged spies and Moscow has taken reciprocal action. In response, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman said that the West is escalating the conflict in Ukraine by encouraging Kyiv. Meanwhile, NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg has termed nuclear weapons as NATO's ultimate security guarantee and a means to preserve peace. Stoltenberg's comments came after Russia conducted non-strategic nuclear drills. The NATO chief highlighted the alliance's efforts to adapt its capabilities to current security threats.
NATO's nuclear deterrent is our ultimate security guarantee and our ultimate deterrence. And this is something which is developed over many years, the nuclear sharing arrangements, where the United States has nuclear weapons in Europe, but where allies are providing the planes, the storage, the command and control, the support to make this an effective and secure part of NATO's total deterrence and defense.
To Spain now, where Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan have held bilateral talks in the capital Madrid. It was part of the 8th Spain-Turkey high-level meeting where the leaders will sign a series of agreements and hold a press conference once the meeting is over. Earlier, Mr. Sanchez welcomed Erdogan at the Moncloa Palace with military honours. In retaliation to the European Union's tariff hike on imported Chinese electric vehicles, Beijing may target the agriculture sector of the European Union. While French brandy is already under the scanner, pork, of which Spain is a major producer, may also be probed. This may be a step to safeguard its business interests without going for an all-out direct trade war. On Wednesday, the European Union announced 38.1% hike in tariffs applicable from July this year to protect the interests of domestic manufacturers. That's it from me here in Washington, D.C. Back to you now in the studio.
Okay, thanks very much for those updates. And still to come on DD India Global. Around 40 Indian nationals were killed in the deadly building fire in Kuwait.
Wherever news breaks, whatever it takes.
Connecting corners, cutting across continents.
Stories that matter from across the globe.
Accurate, authentic journalism that serves you right. From politics to glamour, from sports to world affairs, with a fusion of aesthetics and substance. Introducing news in a new avatar. Experience the world through a new lens. Stay tuned to DD India for an exciting journey beyond borders.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi chaired a meeting to review the situation in Jammu and Kashmir. National Security Advisor A.K. Doval was present in the meeting. Prime Minister was given a full overview of the security situation. Prime Minister spoke with Home Minister Amit Shah and discussed the deployment of security forces. He also spoke with Jammu and Kashmir Lieutenant Governor Manoj Sinha. PM was briefed on the efforts being undertaken by the local administration. Some 40 Indian nationals were killed in a deadly building fire in Kuwait. Investigations are still underway. India's Minister of State for External Affairs, Kirti Vardhan Singh, reached Kuwait. He rushed to Jabar Hospital to ascertain the well-being of the injured people. He met with 6 injured admitted at the hospital. All of them are safe. Before leaving for Kuwait, the minister said a DNA test was being conducted to identify the victims. He said an Indian Air Force plane is on standby to bring the mortal remains back to India.
The situation is that the victims are mostly burn victims, and some of the bodies have been charred beyond recognition. So a DNA test is underway to identify the victims, and the Air Force plane is on the ready. And as soon as the bodies are identified, their kin will be informed, and our Air Force plane will bring the bodies back. The latest figures that we had last night, the casualty figures are around 48, 49, out of which 42 or 43 are believed to be our countrymen Indians.
India's MOS Ministry of External Affairs, KV Singh, met Foreign Minister of Kuwait, Abdullah Ali Al Yana. Yahya conveyed his condolences on the tragic fire incident, assured full support, including medical care, early repatriation of the mortal remains of the victims, and investigation into the incident. And Kuwait will organize flights for the mortal remains of those who've died in the apartment fire on Wednesday and provide financial sums for the families of the victims. Some 49 people died in an early morning blaze, which hospitalized over 50 more people who were injured. Stuart Smith reports from neighboring Iraq.
The latest information from Kuwaiti officials is that 45 of the people deceased in the fire were Indians. 3 of them were Filipino, and one of the bodies remains unidentified, charred beyond recognition. Authorities say DNA testing will be the only way to find out the identity of that individual, a process that could take some time. As to those that were hospitalized, 9 are still in intensive care, though optimistically 11 have been discharged, with around 3 dozen still in hospital receiving treatment. The fire service has given its preliminary insights into the potential cause of the fire and particularly what made it so bad. The head of the fire service investigation team says that when his firefighters tried to enter the building, they encountered locked doors that should not have been locked, doors that could have allowed people to escape and firefighters to more easily enter, including doors which led to the roof, where ultimately many people were saved by the fire service for those that managed to get up. But so many of those hospitalized, and presumably so many that died, were suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning, smoke inhalation, burns, and even broken bones from those that tried to escape, with eyewitnesses telling media in Kuwait that they witnessed one person jump from a 5th floor balcony to try to escape the flames, hit his head on that balcony, and immediately died. This is what's at the center of an investigation in Kuwait as to what was going on in these apartments, because it's not just this apartment authorities are concerned about, it's many others. The government says it's had requests from landlords to extend the time needed for renovations and changes to 48 hours, but Kuwaiti authorities say they are not going to do that. They will continue with their inspections and they will continue making judgments to try to reassure the Indian community in Kuwait that changes will be made. And indeed, municipal officials have already been suspended while the investigations are ongoing. And the owner of this property will remain in jail, authorities say, until the investigation has concluded. Stuart Smith in Baghdad, reporting for DD India.
Moving on, an estimated 756,000 people in Sudan could face food shortages by September. This is as per a preliminary projection used by United Nations agencies. The results as of June 1st reflect a rapidly deteriorating situation in the country. The most recent projection, released in December, shows 17.7 million people faced high levels of food insecurity. On May 31st, UN said people of Sudan are at imminent risk of famine, with 3.6 million children acutely malnourished. New Zealand's geological experts warned of possible landslides in Papua New Guinea. Authorities ended rescue efforts and search operation in the area. The experts raised concerns on Thursday regarding the stability of the ground. Though only 11 bodies have been recovered so far, the total number of deaths still remain unclear. And India on Thursday sent a flight carrying some 19 tons of humanitarian assistance and disaster relief to Papua New Guinea. The aid comprises 13 tons of disaster relief material such as temporary shelter, water tanks, hygiene kits, ready-to-eat meals and 6 tons of emergency use medicine, medical equipment such as dengue and malaria diagnostic kits and baby food. In the wake of devastating landslide in the Enga province of PNG, India had announced an immediate assistance of $1 million. And now all the updates on the International Yoga Day celebrations, which will be observed on 21st of June. On the occasion of International Yoga Day on 21st June, Run for Yoga was organized on Thursday in Bageshwar, Uttarakhand. School students participated in the special Run for Yoga. The first, second and third winners of the Run for Yoga will be honored on 21st of June. On the occasion, participants said that yoga should be included in a daily routine. With yoga, body and thoughts always remain positive. Indian government on Thursday reappointed former IPS officer Ajit Doval as the National Security Advisor. His appointment will be a co-terminus with the term of Prime Minister Narendra Modi or until further orders. The government order said his third term comes into effect from June 10th. During the term of his office, Doval will be assigned the rank of Cabinet Minister in the table of precedence. Former IAS officer P.K. Mishra has also been reappointed as the Principal Secretary to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, a personnel ministry order informed. Let's now take a look at other stories making news around the world. Netflix's much-awaited Ultraman Rising sees the iconic superhero donning the new role of parent, a mix of mythology with reality. The film traverses through the journey of the superhero, his conflicts, decisions and change in behavior after he becomes a parent himself.
I'm not very good at it. Come on, seriously? Oh my God.
Giving a glimpse into how pollution and climate change may impact Antarctica after a decade, University of Chile has developed a video game called Antarctica Metaverse. The game allows users to develop their own hypotheses and reflect on biodiversity and climate change.
Muchas especies no logran adaptarse a los cambios y pueden desaparecer para siempre.
Experts in China are exalted over the efforts to return giant pandas into the wild. Though there is no direct evidence, but it is being said that the population of pandas has increased from 28 since its last count in 2021. And that's all for this edition of DD India Live. Let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. For those on the go, you can get all the latest news and developments from India and across the world on DD India mobile app. The app is available on both Android and iOS platforms. Scan this QR code on the screens to download now. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India Global. Namaskar.